There have been a lot of hidden messages within the cartoons that my generation has been quite lucky to actually see throughout their time, throughout our youth. And many of those were pretty subtle, I may say. Some of us maybe realized them when we were children, or it took us a long time to realize, but at least the seeds have been planted. Many characters in those cartoons would speak about how horrible and boring life is designed to be in this sick society, how it all ends up being nothing else but uselessly grinding, and in the end, the rewards that you get are barely any worth it. And it's all about whatever you get in the end, you still feel alone, you still feel damp within, you still feel as if there is literally no reason to live. When it comes to things like this, one particular archetype I have observed and I thought a bit about. Remember, there used to be those superhero cartoons, but not the serious ones like Superman and the such. There were the goofy cartoons where, some goofy looking um, bad guy, kidnaps the hottie girl and, ties her up and puts her on, on a train track. Yes. And it's always they do that. And the train is always coming. Yes. And the superhero has a certain limited time to save the girl. Yes. But the question was that actually it? Was that the straightforward aspect of good always rescuing and the good always foils the bad ones plans, or was it some other more subtle layer? For me, especially recently, it felt so. And I looked at it and thought, well, isn't this actually a mockery in a way? Why? Because think a bit about it. You've got the serious cartoons with, the superheroes and the such that had actually a great plot. And then you had some of those cartoons which definitely felt more like low budget or something. But those cartoons were like, the villain was goofy, the superhero was goofy, nothing was to be taken seriously. Yes? And wasn't that actually a mockery of life? Because in the end, the evildoers are more or less slaves of their own psyche, their own compulsions, and technically they are living nothing else but, well, impulses that they have received from their ancestors. Yes? And when it comes to the so called good guys, are they any different? See, many of those goofy heroes, they're probably nothing else but, they're mocking the fact that neither the wrongdoers as well as the do gooders know actually what they're doing. They're just following some compulsions. Yes? And then the fact that drew my attention the most was, in a way, the haughty girl. Because, see, I ran all of those memories through a different, much more modern filter. And I said, maybe the bad guy was, looking like a big, chunky dog or whatever goofy shape they had. But the question was, in the end, what if those actually are archetypes of something else? Yes? When I remember those goofy ass cartoons, the haughty woman was not necessarily fully defenseless. Yes, she was tall, she was good looking, but when it came to her being tied up, the ties were just around her body, somewhat keeping her arms stuck to her body, but not entirely. And if I remember from some of those goofy ass old cartoons, her legs were like entirely free, and she looked kind of goofy as she was crying for help, and she was literally moving her feet in all directions. But when we were young, and probably that was the whole point, the action was based on the so called woman's helplessness and on the coming of the train, which was literally the problem. But how many people actually thought, well, the woman's legs are actually free. Why doesn't she actually, you know, get herself into a position where she can actually end up kneeled, wake up to her legs, and simply walk away? Yes? Because given how the tension is made, the train never hits her instantly. It always takes a certain time because Psychologically, you need a certain bit of time, at least a few seconds, to build up the suspense. Yes? So I felt that those cartoons were more like not necessarily a mockery, but more like for those who are capable of seeing things at a very deep level. What if those are nothing else but a true representation of life? What if the bad guy is nothing else but fate? Yes, maybe fate. People would say, but why fate? Well, very simple. Things happen in your life. Obviously, if you enjoy them or you don't enjoy them, that is the psychological aspect of your existence. You either like or you dislike something. If you are truly a human being, not a human doing, obviously you will seek to simply detach. You will keep a certain distance. It is likable or not likable, but life will go on irrespective of how much you choose to hurt yourself or, well, to stay hurt in those, pains, or, well, if you still keep thinking about them in the future. Yes, or, well, life still goes on if you detach from those. Take the lesson that there is and simply move on. Now, the haughty woman always felt to me like the archetype of the regular people, the ignorance, yes? Because they always make it as if the situation is horrible, dire, and they always piss their eyes and victimize and the such, much like the haughty girl in those cartoons. You know, she could almost always feel that, she could free her arms from those ropes. Because one cartoon that I remember specifically is that the woman was not only tied up with rope, but the so-called evil guy actually made a ribbon around. That ribbon obviously made, like, subconsciously gave me the impression that, it was all more like a setup. There was definitely something. Why the heck would someone actually make that thing look extra cutie, right? Except the fact that, none of that was real. Because from a certain standpoint, none of that was actually real. No character was actually hurt because even if the haughty woman would have been hit by the train, it was nothing else but pixel on the screen. Nowadays, obviously, people react for the slightest pixel on a screen, and the digital existence of something is more important than their own physical life. But, well, people have to experience their own limitations. The question is, wasn't that more or less a representation of real life? Yes? When a situation happens, usually it's something goofy, not necessarily something too serious. The majority of people prefer victimizing and doing all sorts of things, yes? And pissing their eyes and wanting for attention. And look also when it comes to so-called religious believers. It doesn't matter what kind of religion they believe in most situations you will find that the majority of those so-called believers, typically the ignorance, will have usually two questions. Why me God? And give me God. Yes? Wouldn't it be me? Yes? So these two affirmations, why me God and give me God, well, these are nothing else but, somewhat narcissistic specifications. Victimization, why do things happen to them? Can't they just stay ignorant and nothing happen to them? And, well, give me God, as if, or God give me, as if, creation is nothing else but a slave that has to, provide to them. So if we are to think a bit, well, we can actually realize more and more things that the world is actually nothing else but superficial. Yes? Because look at many of those cartoons. The woman that was tied in that so-called dangerous situation was never tied tough enough. So the situation obviously was not that dire as it looked. What kind of evildoer would tie someone up and also make a cutesy ribbon out of it? Yes, it's a reminder of what Shakespeare said a few hundred years ago, that the whole life is nothing but a stage. Yes, it's only a stage for madness, and just the mad simply prefer to dance along their imagination, their flaws, and everything, because wouldn't they actually do anything to improve their life? Well, obviously, no. It is much easier to embrace the ignorance because in ignorance, see, there is no logic. They can invent anything and there is nothing to technically stop them. Yes? When it comes to sciences, well, that's a bit of a problem because there will always be people to signal that certain things are not the way imagination would want to point it out. Yes? So imagine those other situations like Courage the Cowardly Dog, when the character called Le Quack, the duck, is actually arrested. Each time they are arrested, their wings are very small. The handcuffs that are put on them, they are so very humongous. Yes, they are like immensely greater in diameter than their wings. It's like they're never fitting the character, but still they are handcuffed. Yes, that's how goofy the cartoons were, and in a way they are a cute-ish reminder that life in a way is very similar to that. Many of the wrongdoers, if you look at things nowadays, they're not actually truly arrested. They are taken into custody just so that, the press films it and the people get a sense that, look, some justice has been done. But you have literally no, and I repeat, you have no proof that those dangerous people are actually behind bars. How many governments in the world have actually presented that they released people, ex convicts, dangerous ones, not just criminals, even murderers. They have released them back into society. Yes, you have nowadays rampant pillagers, random muggers, and rapists, and all sorts of the such, that run amok in society. And, well, governments, and worse than that, the authorities don't seem to be doing shite. Yes, when you look at the Muslim worlds, there's quite a lot of tension, and they simply seem to not handle one another too greatly. And there's always more or less of a tribal fight in between them. When you look in many Christian worlds, there's obvious conflict with the Muslim invaders and obviously, the Zionists. So the whole world is not at ease because of our ignorance that has reached, or actually has breached, critical levels long since. Yes, we live in a sick society that wants to reduce the number of people because it literally has no other means of reducing ignorance. But the question is, who will be actually benefiting this? The ignorance or the wise people who naturally don't have too many people, too many children? Yes? So the very simple point is, remember that all those goofy ass cartoons were nothing else but reminders of how this sick society functions, how this world exists. Remember those episodes? There was a cartoon a long time ago. I forgot the name, but I was reminded of it, where, people would go and live a boring life. And then suddenly, when the work shift would end, they would go to some exquisite places and they would throw all their clothes away. They would dress on some weirdly looking costumes and they would actually start behaving like different creatures, mythological creatures, or animals, or whatever else, anything else but humans. Yes? And that was not explained in the cartoons, but it was something that you can either take as predictive programming, which actually is happening around us, but also you can take it as a reminder of how things are. In a sick society, people will need all sorts of escape mechanisms. Those cartoons were not designed as a predictive programming. Those were designed as raising awareness. Why? Because people nowadays aren't doing things in like for the first time. People pretending to be animals, homosexuality on the loose, and all sorts of things like these that many people call a problem. These are not necessarily a problem. Agendas behind those and supporting those aggressively might be a problem, but people pretending to be animals and exaggerate homosexuality and all sorts of behaviors beyond this that go to high rates of anti-socialism, or, well, not socialism, it sounds political, antisocial tendencies. Well, that is another problem. It is escape mechanisms that people cling to, and these have been going on for ages before these modern times. Those cartoons are just raising awareness of how people truly function. And now, with the internet and with the possibility to record and post something and have that travel the world at record speeds, we are finally capable of being more aware and to become more aware of our surroundings and of how our ancestors have been living. There was literally not much wrong about them. They were still people like us, with frustrations just like every other generation. Yes? And, well, they had their distractions as well and their ignorance as well. And, well, we are simply inheritance of such a society. So hopefully this video raised a bit of awareness. You are appreciated. Take care. Enjoy life. This being said, Ferenc Board signing out.